Alright, so for this video, I'm going to walk you through an example of counterargument so that you can learn how to qualify your own claims so that they can be more complex and more sophisticated. So the first thing I want to show you before we look at the sample of a counterargument is the prompt that this counterargument is working towards. So I've highlighted the task statement. This is a synthesis prompt or question 1. And it says, then synthesize information from at least 3 of the sources and incorporate it into a coherent, well-developed essay that argues a clear position on whether the USPS should be restructured to meet the needs of a changing world, and if so, how. So I've highlighted the entire task statement, but I've also underlined 2 parts of it because there are 2 parts to this task, and I've circled and. Both are good strategies for when you're taking your test and analyzing prompts yourself. But the point in showing you this is just to kind of show you the context for the sample that I'm about to show you. So again, the task for this essay is to take a stance on whether the USPS should be restructured, and if so, how. So this is my example of a counterargument. I'm going to read through it just once, and then I'm going to break it down to show you how I've structured this argument to create an effective counterargument. So it says, the USPS can only hope for sustainability by embracing new technology. The obvious opposition to this solution is that not all have access. In her article, Advantages of Using the United States Postal Service, Dawn Hawkins points out that even though the vast majority of people are connected to the internet, there is a minority of people who do not have the same access. Regardless, this belief in the inequity of technological access can be addressed. As an article from Newsweek proposes, Congress is considering an expansion of broadband access, which, if properly utilized, can address this gap between those who have technology access and those who do not. Therefore, the USPS can get into the e-business, as suggested in the same article, and not leave people behind. In other words, as people are transitioning to digital correspondence, the USPS can meet them there, and in that case become more relevant. This move to a more technological approach is the best solution for restructuring the USPS. So again, remember, our prompt is to take a position on whether the USPS should be restructured, and if so, how. So based on what I've just read you, clearly this is an argument in favor of restructuring the USPS, particularly by asking them to embrace new technology, which would be the how part of that task statement. So I'm going to mark this up, do the same on your own, but I want to kind of point to a few different things in this sample body paragraph. The first thing I'm going to highlight is the claim for this paragraph. So remember, the prompt is about restructuring, and if so, how you would do that. So this is definitely a statement that would affirm that there does need to be a change and that the solution is to embrace technology. Now, in a counterargument, sometimes it can be easy to kind of jump right into what other people say, but it can be helpful if you kind of still start with a central claim to establish your position as the writer. So I'm going to put this little note here to kind of describe what I did in this particular claim sentence. So that's the first part of a good counterargument. Go ahead and establish your position on the issue. Now, if you notice in the next sentence, it goes into this idea of opposition. So to kind of highlight what is happening here, I'm going to use yellow. And it says, the obvious opposition to this solution is that not all have access. In her article, Advantages of Using the United States Postal Service, Dawn Hawkins points out that even though the vast majority of people are connected to the internet, there is a minority of people who do not have the same access. So what I like to call this part, where it's introducing what the opposition calls, this is what we call the they say. And this is where you reveal the counterargument. To your own claim. So another way of thinking about it is that if this is our claim right here, then we kind of switch sides and reveal what they say. Lots of times words like opposition, opponents, people who disagree, those are all good ways of kind of leading into that idea of here is what they or the opposition says. Now you'll notice in this particular one, this sentence right here is evidence. So I'm going to put that as a little note over here. But it is important to note that this is coming from a synthesis prompt or question 1. And our goal in question 1 is to really bring sources together and to kind of use both those that agree with us and disagree with us to create kind of a rich discourse or a rich argument that kind of shows all the opinions that are out there. So in the case of a question 1 or a synthesis, we definitely want to use evidence because we can get one more of those sources in there and show our reader that we've not only focused on those sources that agree with us, but we can also use sources that disagree with us as well. Now with a question 3, such as the argument or the free open response question at the end of your FRQ section of the test, it might actually hurt to give too specific of evidence. You can absolutely give examples, but really when we're talking in that regard, we might just speak more generally. So it might not be as specific as the evidence is here, and in fact, it might just kind of be a summary of what the opposition says instead of going into specific arguments. The reason for that is because sometimes if we give too much evidence in the they say, it can actually work against us if our evidence in the rest of the body paragraph isn't as successful, isn't as credible, isn't as relevant, whatever it may be. So the next part that I'm going to mark on here for us is this word right here. And what I like to call this third step in our counter argument is the switch. And I call it the switch because that's where we're going to switch from the they say into what I call the I say, or my own argument where I'm going to continue developing this claim I started with at the beginning. Other switch words are things like however, nonetheless, irregardless, despite this. All of those are kind of good examples of like a word or phrase that signals to the reader that yes, I've told you what my opposition says, but now we're going to switch it and we're going to develop what I wanted to say. So the third part in the kind of the structure of a counterargument is this idea of a switch. Then the rest of the body paragraph, I'm going to quickly go ahead and highlight the rest in blue. This is where I'm kind of refuting that idea throughout. We'll break it down a little bit more specifically. But I've presented the they say. This part, as you might imagine, this step 4 in a counterargument is the I say, where I'm going to point out my argument against what they say. All right? And again, this I say is going to go right back up here and connect back to the original claim that I set out. So let's break down kind of the different parts of this I say section. So it starts with this belief in the inequity of technological access can be addressed. As an article from Newsweek proposes, Congress is considering an expansion of broadband access, which, if properly utilized, can address this gap between those who have technology access and those who do not. Therefore, the USPS can get into e-business as suggested in the same article and not leave people behind. So, because we can see that these are citing sources over here, this is the fifth piece we need, evidence. And I'm going to put this very important note. It should be better evidence than the opposition. A common issue that I see in students writing counterarguments is they might have evidence both for the they say and the I say, but the evidence for a they say might be like a really specific statistic or fact, and then might use an anecdote for the I say. And depending on kind of what that anecdote is, if it's less convincing or it's less specific or it comes from a less credible place or it's kind of more hypothetical, that's not going to hold up well against a really specific statistic from something like Pew Research or a well-respected organization. So with our evidence in the I say, we want to make sure that we're really choosing evidence that's proving our point is more valid than the previous. But in the I say, that's kind of like that next piece. I'm going to provide you the evidence. Then, just like a normal body paragraph, the sixth part is our commentary. So in this case, the commentary is really kind of refuting that part about what they say and developing how the evidence I've just given provides, or proves, I should say, that my claim is more valid. So that's kind of what's happening starting right here. In other words, as people are transitioning to digital correspondence, the USPS can meet them there and at that case become more relevant. This moves to a more technological approach and is the best solution for structuring the USPS. So looking at this last sentence in particular, if you compare that with our original one, you'll notice that they're very similar. It's kind of just a restating of our claim, right? But what's happening in this section is we are explaining why our opinion, or I should say why, here I'll do it this way, why the I say supports the overall thesis, which in this case, as you remember, is that yes, the USPS needs to restructure and that technology is the best way to do that. So looking at this counterargument as a whole, one thing I wanted to point out to you, and that's why I use different colors, is you will notice that the vast majority of this paragraph is spent developing your position. And that's how a counterargument should always be. I am going to briefly acknowledge my opposition in the they say, but I am going to spend the majority of my body paragraph switching it to the I say, and then developing that argument with evidence and explaining how that evidence proves what I'm trying to say in the essay. So for a brief recap, I'm going to switch colors so it shows up a little bit better for us here. Oh, white will be good. Here are the steps for a counterargument. Number one, the first thing we did was establish our position. We did not go into the opposition. We have a claim that established the writer's position. Okay? Then that's where our they say come in, and I'll even change it because we really want to emphasize the fact that when we are saying the they say, it's kind of a step outside of the argument that we're trying to make. Sorry, this is going to bug me. I'm going to make the line just a little bit thinner. So here's where we're going to deviate from our argument just for a minute to acknowledge an alternate perspective. Then we're going to come back because the next thing we want is that switch. The switch is word or phrase to signal a change. Oops, didn't really put a space there very good, did I? Back to the original argument. Actually, I'll say position to be consistent, and that would be things like, however, nonetheless. All of these are good examples of those switch words. Then after we've switched, and it could be a word, it could be a phrase, I'm going to provide the I say, which essentially is my response to the opposition. In this case, opposition said, oh, not everyone has technology access. My response was, this belief in the inequity of technological access can be addressed. In other words, I have a solution and I'm going to present it to you. After I establish that refutation, then I'm going to give you some evidence. And again, I'm going to put my note here, better evidence, better or more convincing evidence than the they say. And then I'm going to finish my paragraph with my commentary, just like normal. And essentially my commentary is explaining why is the I say, or in other words, your position, more valid. And how, does it link the thesis? Now, looking at kind of all of these steps, they can vary in length, and they can move around a little bit. I would always warn you against putting this they say at the end of a counterargument paragraph, just because we always kind of want to leave the reader with what we think in the end and develop our argument as the last thing they read, instead of kind of acknowledging another opinion haphazardly. So here is kind of that rough overview of how you create a counter argument. And again, as you notice, a counter argument is really just a tool to make your argument. So while we're going to acknowledge a little bit of what other people say, such as right here, we're definitely going to spend the most of our time developing our own stance.